you're gonna look great. But if you wanna stay in shape, well, you better. GymWits, GymWits.
That's right, man. Tell 'em.
Welcome to the GymWits podcast. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, a.k.a. Chef Sonic.
And I'm Tony Marinucci, a.k.a. Tips with Tony, your registered dietitian.
And we are the GymWits.
So for years, I've been hearing information, studies, opinions on this subject, and I'm wondering how much truth is there to it. And it's about bread. Simply bread. I remember years back, this guy told me, if you want to lose weight, just stop eating bread. Then I had people at work tell me, oh, gluten is bad. It's not the same wheat that we had 50 years ago, and gluten is not just bad for people that are, have celiacs, but just for everyone, because it's like the spongy stuff that goes in your stomach and it just clogs you up. And then you hear you can read lots of studies that say, oh, bread turns to sugar, especially white bread. And then you hear people say even whole wheat bread is bad for you. That just turns to sugar too. What's so funny?
Like there's a list of talking points, and you're just knocking down all the talking points. Why don't we go like one thing at a time?
Okay. So anyhow, those are the things I've heard. I'm sure you guys out there have heard it too. So we'll hit all the talking points. So. But
it's been one of those days.
Yeah, it's been one of those days.
Yeah, we should have recorded us just arguing with each other.
We had a good one.
Yeah, for like a half hour.
Yeah, a real good one.
Anyway, so that it is a common thing, Tony, that people tend to look at bread as the first thing to cut out when they're going on a diet, and that bread's kind of gotten a bad name. Mm-hmm. So I guess the first question is, where'd that come from? Is there validity to the idea that like bread's a bad thing or something that people really need to avoid?
I think it's from the fact that when people have bread, they can't just have like one piece or one slice, and it usually is a part of the other things that they're eating. So for example, pasta with bread, therefore you're probably having too many carbohydrates. So when you start to cut back, meaning you're getting in what you actually need, not in what's in excess, you tend to see results that way.
Okay, so is there a difference between like whole wheat bread and, obviously there are obvious differences between whole wheat bread and white bread. Practically speaking, as somebody, if I'm going to get a sandwich or order a sandwich, should I avoid eating white bread? Is that overblown? Like where do you stand on that, or where does the science stand on that?
So we want for general recommendations, like these always are, we want people to be getting half of their grains whole. So whole wheat bread would be an example of that, right? The reason behind that is because whole grain bread is in its natural form, so it naturally has all the vitamins and minerals that you need, and dietary fiber, which is the key component. Because white bread or enriched wheat flour, and we'll get into the definition of what that is exactly in a minute, will have the vitamins and minerals because it's been enriched back, but it'll lack the dietary fiber, which we need to make us feel full, so we don't have 4 or 5 slices and our belly is like, okay, that's enough. Mm-hmm. So I usually recommend people make at least half their grains whole. So if they're going to have a sandwich and they're ordering, they are going to have a sandwich, I would tell them to have whole wheat bread. Say, for example, they're not willing to change their rice to brown rice, then it's like, all right, at least you did your sandwich with whole wheat, then maybe that white rice is okay.
So even hearing people say that whole wheat bread is really bad for you. I've heard one person on their YouTube channel, and we know what that means, say that whole wheat bread is one of the worst things you can eat. Where did that come from?
I think in general, bread is a processed food. So when you look at white bread or whole wheat bread, any bread in general, some of them, you're going to find them on the shelves and they're going to have a laundry list of ingredients. Some of those ingredients might be things like high fructose corn syrup or added salt or sodium, a lot of preservatives. So it's a type of bread, just like anything we've always talked about, right? Not one food's better than another. It's the type, and you want to really start to look into what's exactly in that bread that you're getting.
So now, when it comes to white bread, so when we're looking at the difference between whole wheat and white bread, so you explained why whole wheat bread is better for you or good for you. But then you touched on it. But can maybe you explain a little bit more about what may be bad about white bread, if anything? Does white bread make you more fat, or does it turn into sugar? Like how is there anything negative about white bread, or is it more just that whole wheat bread is better for you? So if you're going to have bread, whole wheat makes for a better choice.
That's a good question. White bread is in its more simple form, so that's when they say it turns to sugar. It is a more simple form of sugar. Carbohydrates have a bunch of different components, and the white bread, it's like kind of already broken down for you, so your body doesn't have to do as much work. And when it comes to blood sugars, so we talked about satiety, so feeling full with dietary fiber, but when it comes to affecting blood sugars, that lack of fiber and also lack of protein usually. And not that bread has much protein, but whole grains will have a little bit more than refined grains, and so the combination of dietary fiber and a little bit of protein with someone who's diabetic or preventing to get diabetes, that would be a better option, because the white bread probably will just get the blood sugars to spike, and that can lead to many other complications.
So now what about other types of bread? Would they fall into whole wheat or whole grain territory, or is it just something else like a rye, pumpernickel, Ezekiel bread, sprouted bread, stuff like that?
So that's a really great question. So the first part to that is there's a huge misconception that rye bread and pumpernickel are whole grain. And actually, they might have some whole grains, but same thing with the term multigrain. It just means a variety of grains. It can be a variety of refined grains and a variety of white grains. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's whole grain. The best way to check if it's whole grain is to look at the dietary fiber. And it would be nice as a registered dietitian for people to get their fiber higher, because most of us are not meeting that mark. So the optimal goal would be that your bread had 5 grams of dietary fiber per slice. Realistically speaking, you'll probably get bread that has like 3 grams of fiber per slice. And then in regards to like your question with the Ezekiel bread is like a huge fat, but it's in a good way, because it's not processed. When you look at the ingredients, it has a shorter ingredient list, and they usually use a bunch of different grains. Now there are Ezekiel breads that don't have that high dietary fiber, but they also don't have the preservatives. So it really depends on what you're looking for. And it's usually frozen, so it stays fresh, longer. That's why it doesn't need the preservatives, because you're buying it when it's frozen.
And just sort of to follow up on that, are all of those types of breads made equal? Like, is there a bad rye and a good rye? Is there a bad pumpernickel and a good pumpernickel? Or is it like, if you have rye bread, it's rye bread? Is there any difference?
Rye bread was your nickname for me, and you'd call me rye bread in junior high school.
I've had many nicknames for Ryan.
Actually,
many nicknames for Ryan over the years.
That's cute. They called me Tony the Tiger.
Nice. Pretty good.
So I think it goes back to the preservatives.
Gotcha.
At the end of the day, like, rye bread is rye bread, but what are you putting on it and what are you putting in it? That's another thing that, Ryan, to kind of go back to your question about, is white bread bad or good or what? It's also what you're eating it with too.
Sure.
So if you're just having, like I was saying before, white bread and white pasta, no vegetables, no protein, and that's it, your blood sugars are definitely going to spike. Your insulin's going to get going, causes weight gain. I mean, there's a whole other thing that, it's not always about what you're eating, but what you're eating it with.
So now, one other thing, you meant, I think I heard you mention enriched, but if you didn't, what does it mean when bread says that it's enriched?
Right. So you'll look at white bread, or also wheat bread does not mean whole wheat bread. So let's just get that down. And the coloring doesn't make it whole wheat either. But you'll look at the front of the label and it'll say enriched with folic acid, iron, and like your B vitamins or whatever. So basically what's happening is a whole grain has 3 layers. Okay. The outer layer, the middle layer, and the inner layer. The inner layer is just the carbohydrates, which is white bread. The outer layers is the dietary fiber and the nutrients. And so the white bread basically is the inner layer of the grain. And then what they'll do is they realize, we just got rid of all the nutrients, so let's fortify it and add it back. So you'll get nutrients, but it's not in its natural form, and it's not with the fiber. So it's kind of like taking something, modifying it, and then putting something back, but not in its whole form. So it's a little silly.
Is it better though than just getting like, Wonder Bread?
So even Wonder Bread probably is enriched. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what happened was they so this is a really interesting story, so we probably should go over this. The reason how white bread even became popular was it was a staple for rich people. And it was like the cool thing to have white bread. But then they started realizing all these deficiencies, and especially something like folic acid, which is removed from the whole grains, is essential when people are trying to have a baby, those beginning stages. And they were noticing deficiencies and like weird birth defects. And then they realized, oh, we have to do something. So they started fortifying a lot of the grains with the folic acid.
Mm-hmm. So now, a little bit off the topic, I guess. If someone wants to make their own bread, are there any staples or any things they should look for or try to do to make it properly?
Yes. So I think maybe this is where we can also jump to the question you were referring to in the beginning, Justin, about wheat and gluten. Like gluten is what gives bread its elasticity, its texture. And it's really hard to make gluten-free bread. I've tried. It's really, really hard. It comes out very dense. You don't get that fluffy and airiness to it. So to answer your question, it can be done. And I know people who do it. I think it takes a little bit of skill and mastery and patience. But it wouldn't be a bad idea to make your own bread, but then you would need some sort of whole grain. So if you are gluten sensitive or you're allergic to gluten, you would still want to use a grain like either brown rice flour or quinoa flour. Those are naturally whole grains rather than whole wheat flour.
So now, speaking of gluten, is that something that's been overblown? I know this is an episode that we can talk about. We could talk about gluten as its own thing, so I don't want to get too much into that. But, I guess, so I'm going to rephrase my question, actually. So I've heard people, when they talk about bread, they'll say, oh, well, bread's like glue, and bread has gluten, and gluten's like glue. Look, it's even in the word, and that glue binds things together. And how would you like to eat glue and then have that stick all the stuff together in your stomach and you can't get it out? So basically, outside of people who are gluten sensitive, is gluten a bad thing, or is it just a way for people to kind of make bread into a bad thing, or talk about bread as if it's a negative thing?
Yeah, there's no studies to show that you should avoid gluten if you're not sensitive to it, and that it's bad in any means. It's just some people are allergic or sensitive to it, and therefore they're best to avoid it.
Okay, got it. But so if you're not sensitive to it, though, like it's not going to bind into your stomach and then
then also the other side to that is I'll see a lot of people that will go on a gluten-free diet because they think it's a healthier diet and a new way of life for themselves. And by doing that, then a lot of the gluten-free products actually are highly processed. Yeah. And to compensate for the loss of texture and flavor, they'll add things like fat and sugar, and it just becomes like even a less healthier option than the bread they were probably already consuming. Yeah.
No. So are there other additives or things included in the bread that can be problematic or are unhealthy or cause problems now?
I mean, I just, it's, so there's not, if you look at all the things that are safe to be in our food, there's a lot of them, because I don't think it's one thing directly that affects the way we digest our food and how it's not in its natural form. So I usually tell people, if you can't read the ingredients or it sounds chemical, look for another alternative. You can't, it's really hard in our society in the way that we live, especially everything's so fast paced. So there's a lot of processed foods, quick on the go. There are options out there that don't have any additives or preservatives, but it's hard at the same time. So with that being said, if the bread's the only processed food that you have that has those, fine. But if it's part of an entire diet that when you look at your labels, you can't read the list, then you might want to reconsider. So, I mean, the first thing so there's nothing really specific, but I mean, the little things like high fructose corn syrup, there's some simple things that we see a little bit too much that we want to think about, should that really be there?
So I've heard people say that the bread that we're eating now is different than it was 50 years ago. Now that might start to border on another GMO debate or something along those lines. Is there any credence to that, and would that make a difference?
Well, I think naturally over the years, our diets have changed, and because of mass production, that's where you need the additives and the preservatives. And back in the day, no, the bread wasn't made that way. So there's some truth to that. But once again, there's not one thing that's going to cause your harm to your health. It's usually the whole lifestyle, the whole diet. But if you are a huge bread eater, whether you're having a good choice or a bad choice or a healthier choice or a less healthy choice, I still encourage people, because it's still usually processed unless you pay really like a lot of money or you make it from scratch, and that's a value to you, which is wonderful. Then it's a little bit different. But I usually encourage people to, if a sandwich is really convenient, it's nice to have, but have other types of whole grains that are natural, like baked potatoes, quinoa, brown rice. It doesn't always have to be bread where you're getting your carbohydrate sources from.
So what about some other bread products? Like, I guess the common one would be pasta. Is pasta's a...
Well, so that kind of goes more into like carbohydrates, right? So we did touch about whole grains, and I kind of talked about that. So with whole grains, that would cover rice, grains, breads, pastas, cereals.
Sure.
Cereal's a big one.
A
big one, because cereals will have they'll use the whole grain stamp as a claim that it has whole grains. And it will, but it still doesn't have high fiber, and it also then has added sugar and preservatives. So don't just look for the whole grain stamp, guys. Look at the nutrition facts label, look at the dietary fiber, and check for at least 3 grams or more, and try to keep the sugar in less than double digits.
I guess that offers a decent question. What, and it's almost another episode in and of itself. What are some decent breakfast cereals, cold and warm?
Well, so oatmeal, first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
Oatmeal, but obviously without the added sugar. Okay. That's a natural whole grain. A lot of Cheerios. The claims about it lowering cholesterol, I mean, I don't know what studies are behind it, but on a regular basis, I have clients that come in with high cholesterol. We switch their breakfast to Cheerios, and their cholesterol goes down. And they're having it on a consistent basis. So there is definitely some truth to that, and I think it's the dietary fiber and the fact that there's no added sugar with it. So those are the first 2 things that come to mind when it comes to a whole grain breakfast.
So you mentioned, getting back to bread, you mentioned frozen bread earlier. Is there a difference? Does freezing the bread have any effect on its nutritional value, or if it's a certain level of nutritiousness, if that's a word, and you throw it in the freezer, is it going to still be as nutritious when you take it out of the freezer?
Yeah, actually, the freezing process stops the nutrients from basically getting less and less every time food is exposed to air, through travel, through cooking, through preparation, it loses the nutrient content. So freezing it actually keeps the nutrient quality.
So we shouldn't toast our bread?
You can still toast it. So people will tell me all the time, they're like, I heard frozen vegetables aren't bad, so I won't eat my vegetables. And it's no, frozen vegetables actually have the most nutrients unless you know the farmer, which unfortunately we don't all have that opportunity right now. Even if you buy local, by the time it was picked and put out and someone purchased it, you bring it home, put it on the shelf, you wash it, you cook it, you eat it, the nutrient quality diminishes each time. But regardless, you're still going to get the benefits from either frozen or fresh. It's all about what you're adding to it and if you fry it, all those things.
What about local preservatives? If they're made at in the same city that you live?
But they're a preservative?
Yeah.
Well, unless it's a natural preservative, if it's a chemical preservative, I wouldn't trust any chemical preservatives.
Even if it's local?
No.
Or organic?
Stop. Yeah, you're just getting mockery.
So...
Is that a word?
So
I don't think I used that right.
When it comes to bread, when it comes to bread and carbs in general, we've talked about it before. The glycemic index can be an important indicator of how good or bad that particular carbohydrate is for you. Is it across the board? Does it vary much, the glycemic index of different breads? Are there ones that are better than others as far as the glycemic index?
So recently a lot of people have been telling me that. They'll come into my office and they'll say, I have sourdough bread because I heard it has a lower glycemic index. And yes, it does. But there's also carrots, for example, have a higher glycemic index. But I think you're better off eating more carrots because there's vitamin A, there's more fiber, and it's usually not, once again, how the food is being eaten by itself, but as a whole with other foods. So I mean, if you're not willing to go from white bread to whole wheat bread and you prefer sourdough and you have diabetes, I would say maybe. But the whole glycemic index, because basically the glycemic index is an indicator of how it's going to affect your blood sugars, right? The higher your blood sugars will be affected, the lower your blood sugars will be affected. Now, if you're a diabetic and you already have the basics of carb counting, that might be the next step. But I think a lot of people, we could probably do a whole other episode on this, they're just using the glycemic index to justify so many different things. And I'm sorry, but like you shouldn't avoid carrots or beets because they have a high glycemic index. Like when you start to really put it into perspective, that might not be the greatest tool. But if you're sensitive to blood sugars, if you have, if you're diabetic and your blood sugars are very sensitive and you're already doing everything you need to do, that's when a dietitian will recommend, okay, let's take a little bit deeper of a look of what you're eating, what you're pairing it with, and maybe this might not be your vegetable choice.
Well, I would just want to add that while you shouldn't avoid beets because of the glycemic index, you should avoid it because it's projectile vomit inducing.
Oh my gosh, I love beets.
But otherwise,
Stop it. I love beets, and they're good for runners, and I've been eating them a lot because, as you guys know, I'm training for a half.
I used to detest beets. And then I've grown to like sort of accept them over the years.
They're disgusting.
They're delicious.
Like I can have a sliver of beet in like a salad and not know it, and it'll it's awful.
It's really good with goat cheese and walnuts and dark leafy green. Oh my god, I love beets. And a chickpea salad.
so I guess one more question, I guess, on the bread topic is. So I know we talked about it a lot, and for some listeners, they just want to know, like, all right, what do I buy? So if you're just the average person listening to the podcast, they're not going to remember all this information or much of it. But what's the one takeaway as far as if they're going to purchase bread, or if they're going to order bread? Like, what words should they be looking out for? What should they be, what should they look out for when they're making that decision about purchasing bread?
Great question. Look for the word whole. If you in the ingredients, if it's not the first or second word, it's probably not right for you. So in the ingredients, it should say whole grain, not wheat, not grain, not just whole. Look for the word whole.
What about multi?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, look for the word whole. And there's plenty of options that like will probably debunk some of what I'm saying. But in general, you want to look for the word whole. You want the dietary fiber to be at least 3 grams. Like I said, if you get 5 grams per slice, that would be great. And you want the ingredient list to be pretty simple and not a lot of additives and preservatives. And
if even though we've kind of established that whole wheat bread is good, you still shouldn't have like 10 slices of whole wheat bread with your meal.
No, okay. Yeah, you want to always, like anything, get a variety of nutrients and a variety of different food sources. So if you have, say, 2 slices of bread, you have a sandwich for lunch, then, with dinner, instead of having bread, maybe have a baked potato. Maybe, like I said, with the other starches, there's things like farro, and we already talked about like quinoa. I mean, there's so many that you can do as a whole grain instead.
So I'm just going to ask both of you guys where you think this comes from. We sort of touched on it in the beginning. Why do you guys think bread has been made out to be an enemy?
I'll take it because I'm not the expert on this first, and then I'll let the expert give probably the better answer. But I think it's just part of me thinks it's just the diet nutrition industry. It's bread has been made out to be a bad thing. Bread are bread high in carbs compared to, you've got bread, rice, potatoes that have kind of been given a bad name, all because they're high in carbs. And so when we, you get into the no carb kind of fad diet type of thing, those are an easy target. And then I've heard the whole glue thing so much now that I think bread makes for an easy target. So that's my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you need to be an expert to know that. I think that I would completely agree with that because there's no scientific evidence that says bread is directly correlated with being overweight or a bad diet or anything like that. It's just the type of bread and how much and all that stuff.
So basically, bread can be incorporated into a healthy diet.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Cool.
So all right. People shouldn't fear it.
Yeah.
No.
Shouldn't fear it. All right. Well, we have an Ask the Dietitian question. And if anybody has questions on bread that we haven't answered, as usual, send us emails, send us the question, and we'll be happy to answer. So this one comes from Eloy, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, says, hello, I just heard a podcast with you guys talking about fad diets, which I enjoyed listening to. Just curious on your thoughts on flexible dieting or if it fits your macros. You said in the podcast, if it's too good to be true, it's usually a fad diet. But with flexible dieting, you're able to fit in foods usually which you would consider unhealthy, and it's kind of a hot topic around the fitness industry. Your thoughts?
Okay. So I'm thinking that he is using the term flexible and fad interchangeably, and he doesn't really know that. In the sense that a fad is anything that you're doing temporarily, and with flexible dieting, then again, we have talked about people that are training and not really training for anything, just they eat and they exercise the way that they train. So I'm wondering if it's for long term. So short term effects, it would probably, from flexible dieting.
Totally. Sorry to interrupt you. First off, what is flexible dieting?
So I think so that's like a very broad term. If it fits your macros, I could speak to a little bit more. Okay. I feel like what he's saying with flexible dieting is more of like, you can have a certain amount of, Monday, you kind of have like your cheat day, right? Or you're able to, if it fits your macros, like you're able to have like a bacon cheeseburger as long as it has the right amount of carbohydrates, protein, and fat. So with that, it's not, we know those food, like a lot of excess fat is not good for us. A lot of excess saturated fat and salt. If you're training really hard, it might not affect you as much. I don't think it really establishes healthy eating. And also it depends on like if you're trying to bulk or you're trying to slim down. So if it fits your macros, and flexible dieting is used for both methods. And if you're trying to lose weight, it's going to be much easier to choose foods that are lower calorie density. So your fruits, your vegetables, your whole grains, and stuff like that. As a dietitian who I want people to be healthy, I would encourage you to choose, lean proteins, whole grains, fruits and vegetables. I don't believe in the cheat day. I believe in like 80% of the time you should eat healthy and 20% of that should not be so healthy, meaning if that's what you prefer, meaning like that would mean one part of your day, but not every day. It's kind of really hard to answer because it's a little bit broad, but personally, and as a dietitian, I don't think justifying less healthy food is like, I almost feel like that's the answer that he wants me to give. And I'm really sorry, Eloy, but I just can't give that answer. I know that it's huge in the fitness world, and I know that, a lot of people will, eat less healthy food because they worked out really hard and it works within their plan, and that's wonderful. I just think it could be done in a different way.
And I also feel like it sounds like if it fits your macros is just kind of almost not a rebranding, but another way of doing like a Weight Watchers type of a diet. Where
it's just like any dietitian. What I do is I calculate how much protein someone needs, how much fat someone needs, and how much carbohydrates they need. But then I recommend healthier sources of that, because then there's the micronutrients. So if it fits your macros is the basics, and that's going to help you with energy and weight and aesthetics. But if you're going to look on the inside of what your blood panel looks like, and your risk for diabetes and high cholesterol and high blood pressure, and then like long-term effects, and kind of working in healthy habits now rather than when you're older, I look at it that way.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Could you maybe think about it as, we know that alcohol isn't good for you, right? Probably better to drink no alcohol, although there is some studies that say a small amount of alcohol is good, right? You wouldn't necessarily want to be a flexible alcohol drinker, but if you practice moderation with it, just as you like, there's no way that you could say that eating, French fries and a bacon cheeseburger is healthy for you, but it might be healthy for your mind once in a while. It might,
right.
In that case, practicing moderation is fine. You're going to enjoy life, enjoy the things that you enjoyed eating, and if you enjoy alcohol, once again, enjoy it in moderation. But to say that it's okay to do something that is, unhealthy and try to make it healthy in a way.
Right. So I think that brings up a really good point. And so I have a lot of experience working with people with eating disorders, restrictive eating, binge eating, like all that stuff. And there's people that have that on all different types of levels. But one thing that I really encourage people to do is to look at food as fuel, as nutrients, and not have it be like like aha, like I can't wait for Sunday because that's when I like that really isn't supposed, like food is important and we need to pay attention to it, but to give it almost like you're restricting yourself all week so that way you can indulge, like a planned indulgement on the weekend. It almost makes food like too much of a focus if I'm making any sense in that way.
Especially for people that may not be professionally obliged to their food, like if you're training an athlete or something, or a fitness model where you have to be,
Right. So
just a normal person.
Yeah. I mean, listen, people are doing it and it may work for them. I don't believe that it's great long term. And, if the idea is being healthy, you want to incorporate both counting your macros and eating healthy, and not plan when you're going to have that bacon cheeseburger. Like you were kind of saying, like if it's, sometimes you just want it, like, okay, but it shouldn't be planned every week, it should be you should always be trying to improve yourself in the best way that you can, whether through your mind or your body or whatever. But I don't think it should be like planned out, like, okay, this is when I'm having 3 drinks, or this is when I'm, does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
Cool.
I hope I answered his question.
Yeah. All right, cool. That's it. As usual, if you have questions, send it to the GymWits@gmail.com, and all of our stuff, social media, everything is at thegymwits.com. And that's it. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, aka Chef Sonic, reminding you that truth does not sell.
You need catchphrase?
I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian. 6 weeks later.
We are the
GymWits.